They're not failing because of capitalism. They're failing because of too little capitalism in that instance, right? And so I think we have to speak loudly into this moment, but winsomely. Because I think if we're heard as just saying markets never fail, don't worry about it, just give capitalism another try or something like this, which is kind of what they hear, we're not going to win.
Hello. Welcome again to another episode of the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on another guest who knows a lot about poverty and economics and faith and just a lot of great stuff. And it's none other than Ann Bradley. Ann, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Vance, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, pleasure's mine. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show. We've got a lot to talk about. But before we get into that, let me go ahead and read your bio and then we'll jump right into it. So Dr. Ann Bradley is the George and Sully Mayer Fellow for Economic Education and Vice President of Academic Affairs at the Fund for American Studies. Previously, Dr. Bradley served as the Vice President of Economic Initiatives at the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics, where she continues to research a systematic biblical theology of economic freedom. In addition to her work there, she is a professor of economics at the Institute for World Politics in Grove City College. She is a visiting professor at George Mason University and has previously taught at Georgetown University and Charles University in Prague. Dr. Bradley is the co-editor and author of Counting the Cost, Christian Perspective on Capitalism. Another one is For the Least of These, a Biblical Answer to Poverty, which I have here in front of me, that we're going to talk about a lot today. And another one, Be Fruitful and Multiply, Why Economics is Necessary for Making God-Pleasing Decisions. Dr. Bradley received her PhD in economics from George Mason University in 2006, during which time she was a James M. Buchanan Scholar. So with all that great stuff going on, and we got a lot to talk about, but let me go ahead and ask you the first question that I do all the guests. What motivates you to do what you do every day?
Well, I think that my kind of short answer to that question is just that I think the ideas of Christianity, of course, are part of, it's not just how we live our individual lives, but it's how we kind of are salt and light in the world. So I think we have a responsibility beyond just our families, but to our communities, to our country, but to the world in general. And what is that responsibility? I think part of it is to spread the message of Christ, but it's also I'm an economist as well, so it's really to understand the type of society that's necessary for people to be able to live according to God's purposes. And my view on that is that a society rich in economic freedom, rich in political freedom, rich in civil freedoms is the way to do that. And so I just think it's absolutely essential that we speak to newer and newer generations about these ideas and why they're so important, again, not just for our personal lives, but how we think about the world and how we think about our communities.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And it comes out in your work, whether it's in books or other, op-eds and things of that nature. It definitely comes out that way as well. What got you going down this track? I mean, you go start back as far as you want, but what really got you going down this track of all the things that you just mentioned, whether it be your Christian faith or your economics or whatever? What started giving you this worldview that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I guess it started, I won't be too long-winded, but
Okay.
I will go back a while, which is to say, I was raised in a Christian home with very dedicated Christian parents and two brothers. And so that was always part of our life, going to church, really thinking about, developing our faith as young children. And when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to go on this trip. And we actually found out about it in the mail. We got like one of those flyers. And it was called the People to People Organization. And they sent high school students to different countries. One of those countries I was able to visit as a young high school student was the Soviet Union.
Wow.
We had a chaperone. We were told before we went that we were not allowed to trade, that everybody would know that we were Americans, and that you could go to Soviet prison. Of course, I was terrified of this and did no trading, but that did not hinder a lot of the high school boys on our trip to do a lot of trading. But, I mentioned that trip because I also was raised in a kind of politically conservative home where we, my dad just really thought Ronald Reagan and his message of freedom and anti-communism was very important. I was also raised in a home where my father listened to talk radio all the time, and he loved it when Rush Limbaugh would go on vacation because Walter Williams would be the stand-in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he loved it. He said, "Oh, I love it when Rush goes on vacation because I get to hear Walter." So I had Walter kind of in my head a little bit without really knowing a lot about economics. Kind of fast forward to college, I just chose econ as my major, never having taken a class, but knowing I
Wow.
thought the ideas were important and I wanted to learn more about them. Walter Williams then came and lectured at my college, and
Wow.
I just had amazing professors and thought, okay, I want to do this for a living. I want to get my PhD. I want to teach. And so that's kind of the shorter version of the longer story, but I think it goes way back to being young and not just hearing the anti-communism ideas and the pro-freedom ideas, but actually visiting the Soviet Union. And I don't think I knew it until decades later how important that trip, how much of an impact it had on my life, and why I think defending freedom is my job. I mean, that's why I do what I do. I think it's what God has created me to do, and so I need to do it well.
Wow, I love it. I love it. I believe that God gives us all a calling, right?
Yeah.
And gifts. And we could go through all the different gifts and everything. And but did God give us a calling? And so, like, I love that about you of spreading freedom and allowing for that opportunity. And mine, I believe, is to let people prosper, which is why I do what I do now, and named it, the podcast that I have here. And I was a drummer for a rock band during my teenage years and was not living the Christian, life. And I got in a really bad car accident and rolled 6 times, got life flight at Herman Hospital. And really by the grace of God, we went home that night. There was 4 of us in that car that was in the wreck. And then I really feel over the next month that God gave me this calling to let people prosper. Because I was kind of like, God, where's my life going? And though it was a different journey, I wish I wouldn't have gotten in the car accident. And it was a lot of, it was tough afterwards. It set me on the path to today of being a first generation college graduate and working in the White House and being here talking to you now. And so we each have our own callings. It's just a matter of, can we find it? And then what do we do with it, thereafter? And I love that story that you said there about starting off and everything else. And I wonder, what have been some of the challenges that you faced, over the years of maybe getting this message out, or other things that you'd want to mention that might help others, that help the listeners understand more about you and maybe some challenges that they may face?
Well, I mean, I think all of these things, as you say, we have to figure out first and foremost what we're made to do, and that's certainly not easy.
No.
I think, you're a parent of young children. I'm a parent of a little bit older, but still young children. And I think the culture is sending them a very dangerous message about this, which is just, you can be anything you want. It's like going into a restaurant and choosing from a menu. So I think that we've all faced challenges around that, myself included. I also think that along the way, you might have detours. You might have, I remember entering graduate school, my PhD program, I entered on no funding. So I was definitely an underdog, and that's okay. I think that's actually great because I had to show up, I had to work hard, I had to prove myself. I was able to secure funding. I am just eternally grateful to my professor, Peter Becky, who helped make that happen and who continues to be just a huge intellectual influence and mentor, but a friend. And so I think, it just not being the shining star all the time, right? I think that our culture says that we can all be the shining star. We can't. And I think that's not the only way to make a difference. And so I think we have to realize that. And of course, I've had a lot of different roles. You worked in the White House. I worked for the CIA for a while. And that was based on my dissertation, which was on the political economy of Al-Qaeda. I wrote on that topic because 9/11 happened when I was a graduate student. So when I went in, I didn't know anything about terrorism. I had never thought I would write about it. And so I think for me, that is maybe, kind of an instance where I used that opportunity to write about something I would never have written about. Of course, I was nervous about that, but it really helped me. And while, I wasn't meant to be at the CIA for a long time, that's okay. I was able to use it to learn about what I really wanted to do. So I guess, kind of obstacles are just part of life. They're part of our careers. There were times when I sat in class, I don't know if you felt this way, getting your PhD, and I just thought, I will never survive this math. I will never survive this course.
All the time.
right? Like I can't do it. I would try to like hold back the tears in the
Yes.
classroom thinking, so you sometimes you just really have to recommit every day to persevere. I think that's very important. What do I think some of the challenges are, at the Fund for American Studies and the Institute of World Politics?
Yeah.
Now, I'm a teacher, and so I'm teaching undergraduates and master's students, and I think we are really running against the culture, both what's happening in higher ed, what's happening in K through 12 schools, which is just, I think, focusing less on critical thinking and focusing on an agenda, an ideological agenda that's actually very much counter to freedom.
Yeah.
And so we have to really not get frustrated by that, because I think it's easy to be frustrated when, I always joke that on the first day of a physics class, do people walk in and say, gravity is wrong, I hate gravity? No, they don't really do that, right? Because they just kind of, now, obviously within physics, there's theoretical disputes and things like this, but on the first day of class, it's very reasonable for a professor to say something like, I hate capitalism. It's wrong. It hurts people. It causes inequality. Or, minimum wages. There's nothing good about abolishing them, that, we should go bigger and higher.
We should be taxing the rich more. They're not paying their fair share.
Right. So they come into the classroom with so many preconceived notions, and I want to take their passion and arm it with the economic way of thinking, because passion is not enough to solve our problems. So it's good that they're passionate about caring for the poor. Yeah. It's good that they're passionate about things like cronyism, and there's some inequality that is bad, right? So we have to kind of teach them nuance. And I think economics allows us to arm the passion with really a critical way of thinking about the world. And then we can ask questions. What are the possibilities of embracing human dignity and making the world better? Which is exactly what you do on this podcast.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. And I've had Pete Betke on a couple times on the show, and I've told him this in person, but I mean, he's my favorite living economist, and yes. I love Pete and all the work that he's doing, and continuing to expand with all the other folks that are coming through his program and everything else. I'm so glad you brought him up. I totally agree with you on so many of those levels. And one of the things too, I think that a lot of kids now are told, you shouldn't fail, or failure is a bad thing. And I don't know about you, Ann, but I failed a lot. and I think I grew from it each time. I think it is important for us to not be insane and repeat the same mistakes expecting a different result. But those failures really do help us learn. It's one of the issues that I have with socialism is it almost breeds this idea that you can't fail, which of course it then breeds mediocrity, because none of us are trying to succeed in order to just live each and every day. And to your point about capitalism not being the greatest economic institution that we've had. I don't know, maybe there's going to come a better one, but it's been the best one so far to bring people out of poverty and get more prosperity and more innovation and ideas. And it's unfortunate that many people don't believe that, or are looking to different answers. And the other thing that's unfortunate, and I talked about this a lot on the show, is it's not only from the left anymore. It used to be mainly the left, the progressive left, was the one that was attacking capitalism and free markets and all this stuff. But now, we've seen it kind of from the left and the right, from like the netcons and the populists and everything else. And it's something I'm really concerned about. Even to be honest, to be frank about it, now we have a new presidency coming in with Trump and Vance, and in particular with J.D. Vance. I'm concerned about some of those pushes to the right, where, if we just have the right people in charge, then we can make the decisions that head in that direction. And I'm always like, well, wait a minute. What happens when the other side gets in charge? If you've made that much power in the executive branch or whatever, the other side's going to use it to the same thing. Has some of those things been concerning you?
Oh, very much so. And just to take it back kind of to the theory side for a moment, right?
Sure.
This is why we have to educate about, kind of what are the truths of economics? Well, one is that we're always dealing with flawed, fallen, imperfect human beings who don't have all the knowledge they need. So that's where this argument on the new right, I think, is so concerning, because one is very short-sighted. I think it says if we can get our people in power who kind of truly understand the American worker, who kind of truly understand the right industrial policy, whatever, however they define that, then we can kind of do this Make America Great Again. And I think, America is really great. Lots of people try to come here all the time, which is a very difficult thing for them to do. And it's because it's so great. There's lots of economic freedom. There's lots of robust markets. On the other hand, there are real problems in the United States. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we pretend that those don't exist or we try to ignore. So some of what the new right is saying, even on the left, there are problems. I think our differences, you and I, our differences with both what the right is, the new right, I guess, is saying, and kind of the left, the traditional left, is that government is the solution to the problems that they view as stemming from kind of unbridled or unfettered commerce.
Yep.
And so but it begs the question of human anthropology, right?
Yeah.
If we have these fallen, flawed people, then to your point, if we just give them more temporary power, first of all, the power is never temporary, ever. And, they don't know what to do. And so I mean, with J.D. Vance, I've written on this several times, several essays on some of his very concerning policies, which is that he wants to create more power to kind of overcome the problems. And he doesn't see that, I don't think his solutions are going to work, right? Yeah. I think, and you and I would agree, but I think it's not an ideological fight we're fighting. In some ways it is. It's an economic argument, right?
Right.
How do you help towns that have been, coal mining towns, Detroit, right? These kind of cities that have a lot of problems in the United States. Vance says we need better industrial policy. We need more redistribution. You and I would say we need more freedom. We need more markets. The reason that some of these towns have failed is because of bad state policy.
Yes.
They're not failing because of capitalism.
No.
They're failing because of too little capitalism in that instance, right? And so I think we have to speak loudly into this moment, but winsomely.
Yep.
Because I think if we're heard as just saying markets never fail, don't worry about it, just give capitalism another try or something like this, which is kind of what they hear.
Yeah.
We're not going to win. But I think if we can say, look, we're always dealing with fallen human beings, given those realities, we are always dealing with scarcity.
Yeah.
Given those realities, how can we kind of change institutions and policies so that we get better outcomes? And I think we need to focus on people who have been traditionally marginalized. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Bill Gates will do just fine no matter what. And what we're worried, we need to speak into some of these kind of ghost towns, if you will, in the United States, right? And what's going on in San Francisco? It's certainly not a result of, abolishing the minimum wage, and that's the problem, right? Yeah. It's like the opposite is going on there. So, I think that we need to just speak winsomely into this moment.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Great points there. And I think what they often will say, and you kind of hinted at this, is that somehow since the 1980s with Reagan that we've lived in free market capitalism now. We're living in our utopia, Ann. And I'm always like, well, where is that really happening of where we have free market capitalism? Because we still have a lot of government that's intruding. And one of the things that they'll usually say is, well, these are just market failures, kind of your unbridled capitalism, unbridled commerce, is that these are just market failures. And so we must need government to come in and solve it. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. A lot of these are actually driven by government failures. We too often overlook the fact that there are government failures, and I would argue humbly that those are worse than any of the perceived market failures, because now you distort the incentive structure that's in place for humans to satisfy their desires given the institutions that we have in place. And, a lot of my economic background, and we were talking about beforehand, we haven't met in person yet, but I've been a huge reader and a huge fan of yours. And a part of my economic thinking is more of the mainline economics, which I know you'll know, versus mainstream that Bettke and others talk about, but kind of the Chicago school, Austrian school, public choice economics, and new institutional economics like Douglas North. That's really like where my background is, and where Milton Friedman is my favorite economist, and everything. But with all of that, I'm kind of like, the tools of economics are right here for us to be able to use. It's one of the reasons why I'm big on like fiscal rules, because I want there to be incentives in place for the wrong people to do the right things, as Milton Friedman would say, and monetary rules for, if we're going to have a Fed, which I don't think we should have a Fed, by the way, but if we're going to have a Fed, we should have rules over discretion. I mean, all this stuff seems to make sense. But and now we have the new right saying, well, if we just have the right people in, this goes against the conservatism that I thought was ruling the day for so long. Like, now you're really trying to say that these aren't the right people. If we just had our people in, it's going to be better. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't know how that's ever going to work.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's frustrating because maybe part of what we need to do too,
Yeah.
Vance,
Come
is
on.
talking about capitalism
Yeah.
to at least the spokespeople on the new right. I think is a losing game
Okay.
because they've already buried it, right? They're having its funeral right now, and they're rethinking the rules or rethinking, kind of the way they're even kind of going so far as to say that, kind of markets. I don't know. I guess I don't totally understand always what they're trying to say,
Sure. But they're
I
very hostile. They're very hostile
they're
about it too.
hostile. And I think that capitalism word has so much baggage for them and
Yeah.
it's so triggering, if I can use that word, that maybe that's not useful, right? In some ways, and this is, you mentioned institutions, public choice. I mean, public choice can really help us go a long way in understanding the problems with government.
Yeah.
And so I think people want to feel safe. I think they want to feel comfortable. I think that they feel that, that's why they care so much, both on the left and the right, who has power, right? Because it's power is the tool. And it's definitely a technocratic way of thinking, which is that whoever holds the levers of power can steer the economy in the direction that they deem is appropriate to go. And of course, we know that this is not true. And what you kind of hinted at is that this is just rife with unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So what happens if the solutions we propose create, worsen the problems? What if the poor who we're trying to help, we actually make worse off because of policies that we sold them, we meaning the policymakers, without really kind of being coherent or transparent about what those costs are. And so, of course, Walter Williams and Tom Sowell, they would, there's no free lunch. And Tom Sowell talks about how there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And that's a very hard pill for us to swallow because we want somebody to come in, right? Like a God figure who's God in the government, right? And put them in charge, give them all the power, make sure they're benevolent, and then they'll fix things. And of course, we have to understand that markets are emergent and that institutions change and we need them to change in the direction of freedom and individual liberty. But this is just a very hard message. So if you and I were sitting right down with some of the voices on the new right today, they would dismiss us as market fundamentalists.
Right.
So that's the problem, right? We have to figure out how to have a more productive conversation. And I think just pushing capitalism is not the way to go. But I think if we can say, what I've thought for a while is that people like AOC and Bernie Sanders will talk about cronyism, maybe in a different way that you and I would talk about it. But they do talk about, how they don't think that the elites should have, kind of corporate welfare. They don't think that the elites should have this corporate power that translates into political power. And I think we can get on board with that.
Yeah.
So speaking into that as a way that when this happens, this hurts people who are poor. This hurts people who have less education. This hurts people at the bottom of the income distribution. And the problem is that AOC and Bernie Sanders think it's the fault of markets. But you and I see it as the fault of a government that has grown so much in size and scope that it's kind of corrupting market activity, right? By inducing this cronyism. So I think there's a lot we can do to talk to people about this.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we need to. I mean, I think that's important for us to be able to talk to different sides, whether it be from the left or the new right or whoever. We need more discussion and dialogue. It is tough sometimes, especially with some of the new right, because they will call us market fundamentalists or chastise us for certain things. And but I don't think that has to be the same. That has to be the wave of the future. And I think that there is a way for have a better dialogue moving forward. And one of those, to your point on, just being economically free and less poverty. I think another big one that's we've seen a lot of overlap between the left and the right has been occupational licensing reform, like removing that out from the states. And even on school choice. I mean, even school choice has been something across the political spectrum more have been in favor of. So maybe there are some more things that we agree on than we disagree. It just seems like the bigger ones, the big things that are out there has been really tough to overcome. But before we get too far, though, I want to get into your book, and then we can come back to some of these things later. But and you have multiple books. But this is the latest one that I read, and I just think that it has a lot of good insights that while it is about a decade old now, I think that it's still important for today, just like it is in other times. And this was 2014, so right at a decade ago. And it's for the least of these, a biblical answer to poverty. And one of the big issues that I work on a lot, Ann, is on poverty relief initiatives. Like it's one of the underlying things about let people prosper. But from reading your book, it hit a lot of key points that I think are really important, that I hope the audience will go out and grab a copy of this book, because, let me just tell a little bit about my story about what I see, and then you can correct me and then go in what you think too, or what you see it. But I believe God created us to be fruitful and multiply. I believe that he wanted us to have abundance on earth. I believe that God gave us this earth as kind of a way for us to have heaven into some capacity. But then we have the fall and sin, and then we're fallible creatures as people, as you mentioned previously. And so there are going to be things that come up in our lives. But at the end of the day, God does want us to be fruitful and multiply and to be abundant for all those things that are around us. He gave us these great things called a brain to be able to create new things, to overcome the challenges, which ultimately to serve him is what I believe what we're trying to do at the end of the day. And one of those is dealing with poverty. And you have these interesting ideas that some would say, well, Jesus was a socialist, and how the Bible says that we should be giving to others and things of that nature. But from reading your work and others, to me, it seems more about that should be an individual's choice to do those things. Like, yes, we're commanded to help out the poor, but not from a redistribution from government, but from us helping each other through voluntary cooperation, if you will. And that will allow us to let people prosper, if you will. But I wanted to hear what you think. I just want to give a quick overview. What do you think about that, Ann?
Yeah, well, I agree, and
Okay.
I think that's a big focus of the book, which is an edited volume. So we were very fortunate to be able to bring in some amazing authors, and we didn't want it to just be an academic exercise. So there's practitioners, right? Peter Greer, president of Hope International, who is on the ground globally, trying to figure out how to help the world's poor in ways that doesn't create dependency, in ways that also doesn't, isolate them. And take away their individuality. And so I want to kind of go back to the beginning of what you said. And
Please.
It's very important to understand from a theological point of view. As you mentioned, we are commanded to be fruitful and multiply. You see this in the first chapter of Genesis 26 to 28. And we are made in God's image and God's likeness. That's repeated several times just in one verse. And that's really important, because that is where our dignity comes from. And so we all are image bearers, and we all have dignity. We also all possess human capital. And, my argument is that human capital is the most important of all the types of capital you can have. Human capital is the most important. And so when God tells us to be fruitful and multiply, we all kind of understand what multiplying, right? Family is important. Caring for your family, caring for your community, building it up. We kind of get that. Being fruitful, one of the things we wanted to bring to the table is a discussion about work, and that God calls us to work. So if you look at Genesis 2:15, he says that he puts us in the garden to work it and care for it. Care for it, meaning that we preserve it, we don't destroy the earth, right? So we're not supposed to just extract all the resources, consume them now, and leave nothing for the future. But we're supposed to enjoy, and we're supposed to use. So work, the word there is translated literally to till the garden, which means to change, right? So it's, your point is well taken. It's the application of our human creativity to the garden that I think is the abundance that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the story of the garden, if you go back and read Genesis, it is not a place where people are starving.
No.
It is not a place where people are dying young. It's a place abundant with natural resources, right? And so we still have to learn. Even before the fall, we have to learn. We're not perfect. The fall makes our work more difficult. But what we wanted to do is say, look, the reason that people are poor is because they do not have the same abilities to unleash their human capital in a way that doesn't just benefit them, but allows them to serve their community.
Yeah.
So when I talk about that, I have Adam Smith in my mind, right? I also am an affiliate scholar at the Acton Institute, and they have an amazing documentary called Poverty Inc., which I would encourage people to watch. It's on Amazon, among, I think, other places you can get it. But they talk about poverty as exclusion from market exchange. To me, this is a brilliant point, because it's not that they don't know that they're poor. It's not that they don't know what their needs are. I think we treat people as, being not as smart, people who are poor. They don't have the right ideas. They don't know how to organize their lives. They don't know how to organize society. And so we have to come in and help them. And to your point, I think we do have to come in and help them, right?
Yeah.
The Bible is very, very clear about our call to care for the poor. But it is not a call to create dependency. And it's not a call to socialism. I don't see that anywhere in the scripture. I think people who advocate for that are misrepresenting Acts 2-5, where you see a group of people who voluntarily bond together and decide to share, which I think is different than a prescription for government-induced, which is coercive redistribution, right? So that's a lot. There's a lot to unpack in what we talked about, but I think that there's really powerful lessons for how we can help the poor, both domestically and internationally, when we take these principles to heart.
Totally. I totally agree with you. And I think something that's interesting too is too often people think that government is God, it seems like. Government can solve all these problems, and it becomes a lowercase g God here on earth. And unfortunately, those people that are in government, kind of where James Buchanan came into all this, is to say, look, those people are just people like us.
Yep.
They're fallible. They're not angels. If we were all angels, we wouldn't need government, right? Is what the saying goes. And so it is interesting, even being in the White House where I was for a year, from June 2019 to May of 2020, helped write the President Trump's last budget. And then I was in the Situation Room during COVID and all this other stuff. And it's interesting to see the players that are in there. I mean, and you look around, you're like, man, this is a lot of quote unquote power that's going on. But I think what I tried to bring was also about the humility that we need to be able to have. That in government, we don't have all the answers. It was one of the reasons why I was such an outspoken critic of the shutdowns and the lockdowns, is because I felt like we were putting everybody in the sidelines. And it's ultimately why I left the White House when I did, because I was like, look, we're going in a wrong direction here. I don't think I have all the answers, but I know the marketplace will have more of the answers than I will, or the people here in government will. And so it's mind-numbing sometimes to think about this sort of direction that I think we're going. And from your point, though, and the great work that's in this book, is we do have so many answers in the Bible of what God is trying to say here, God is trying to do for us and want us to be. In your chapter in chapter 8, why does income inequality exist? An economic and biblical explanation. I thought this was an interesting verse, which I hadn't really quite thought about it in this way, but I did after reading it again. But it's Matthew 25, 14 and 15. Quote, and again, it would be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. And I think this is where maybe some people get caught up in this, is like, well, we're all humans, we're all in the image of God, so shouldn't we be equal? Shouldn't we have the same amount of things? And to this verse and to the other stuff that's in this book, we're all different at the same time, right? That doesn't transfer in the same way that it would be like, okay, you're exactly the same. Vance is exactly the same as Ann. Well, there's already differences. No matter what some in the woke culture would like to say, there are differences here. But what do you think about some of those things with income inequality and where we should think about this from a government perspective versus a market, and just Christianity as the background to all this as we go forward?
Well, I think certainly we need to make the case that dignity is egalitarian in the sense, right, that dignity, as Christians, we believe dignity comes from God. I think there are other people who would argue that, make the argument for egalitarian dignity outside of God. But for you and I, right, the answer is, I'm made in the image and likeness of God. As we learned in Sunday school, right, I'm precious in his sight.
Yes.
And we are created with a purpose, and we have to figure out what that is. That's all very difficult and challenging to do, but I very much believe that that's true. That does not mean that we have equal gifts, skills, talents. We're all different. In fact, this is the wisdom of God in his creation, because if he made us identical on all margins, not just height, weight, the way we, appear, but kind of attitudes towards risk, creativity, ideas, competencies. If we were all exactly the same, we would have no margins for trade and exchange. And without those margins for trade and exchange, we can't create value, which is what this is all about, right? I think that gets totally lost in the income inequality discussion, which is that your job on the planet is to create value for other people.
Yeah.
Many people do that in the paid marketplace. Not everybody, right?
Sure.
So we understand that you're going to work in your church, in your neighborhood, in your family, right? I'm a mom. You're a dad, your husband, right? All these things, you're creating value. But a lot of us are going to go into the marketplace and we're going to sell our labor. And how can we have Christianity inform that, right? I think we have to work with excellence, and I think we have to strive to improve. And so income inequality swamps all of that, right? There's no nuance in it. It's just the idea that we have to get closer to equal in some way. And even the people who advocate for this really are only doing what you talked about earlier. They're saying, let's take the very rich and just take a lot of their income. And then presumably we're going to redistribute that income to the poor, which, by the way, we already do that, right? And that has not solved poverty. I am not saying we shouldn't help people by giving them cash. I'm not saying that at all, but is the government the best way to do that? That's a different question, right? But I think that's kind of what the income inequality argument tends to collapse into. But the problem is that then you're going to be put in this position where you're going to have to redistribute forever.
Yeah.
So the thought experiment, right, is like, let's say we could gather up all the income in the U.S., put it into a bucket, and give everybody an equal share, everybody alive. This would include infants. This would include everyone, right?
Yeah.
Well, on day 2, you're already not going to have the equality you had on day 1. Why? Because you're going to do one thing that Vance sees an idea, he's going to do something.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do something else, and somebody else is going to do something else, and Elon Musk is going to do something else. So, right, different aptitudes, different ideas are going to create, they're going to go in different directions. Some people are going to create more value than others. So that's why the market economy is a great way to reward value creation. But I think what the left especially really distorts the debate, right? Because they equate your value as a human being with your income. Nobody is making that argument. I mean, no serious economist is making that argument. People that are advocates of economic freedom and free exchange are not making that argument. And so I think that's a really important point that we need to speak into, which is that, no, we want people to be able to grow their income. So I'm really focused on income mobility.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, my first job was at Baskin Robbins when I was in high school, and God bless the person that gave me that job, because I didn't know what I was doing at all, right?
No.
I was like 15 years old. I have no idea. I'm making minimum wage. He's probably hoping that the cash register is full, I mean, and now I'm not doing that anymore. That's a success story. But that comes from thinking about a lot of institutions in society. You mentioned K through 12 education. That's part of it.
Yep.
The affordability of college. That's part of it. The ability to get a job. The ability to test my skills, right? And if I don't have a free society, I'm really not able to do those things. And I'm really stuck in, and you think about the poorest people in the world today, they're stuck just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to help them escape from permanently.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Amen. And it's interesting too, from the book is talking about, how much money has been sent to other countries, like in Africa, where they're still in poverty, even with the trillions of dollars that have been spent over time. And it goes back to the institutions. The institutions are such that it's not allowing for the people who really need the money to get the money. It oftentimes is filtered down to them, and not in the ways that I think people would want to see it go. I mean, this is one reason why I think I've always argued for either individuals giving to other individuals, or for charities or nonprofits. Someone who has an incentive to continue to be not profitable, but getting the money to people where it's supposed to go. Government has no incentive to do that. They get the money and then they try to filter it through to the people that they think want it to go, but they don't close down if they're not doing a good job. There's no profit or loss sort of incentives that are going on, or revenue and cost sort of situation. They just keep funding it more, whether it works or not. And we see that with K through 12 government monopoly schools or our healthcare, but especially in poverty. One of the key pillars to allowing for people to be abundant and fruitful and multiply. And it's just so unfortunate. And I agree with you too. I mean, I'm not an anarchist. Like, I do believe in certain roles for government. I think they're much more limited than what we have today. And maybe there is a small role for government to be involved with certain poverty relief initiatives, but it's hard for me to see that too far down that road, because I think that the marketplace and communities and churches and synagogues today are crowded out for how much ability they have to give to those in need, because of the taxes that they're having to pay, but because of the regulations, because of all these other things that government has put as barriers to them to be as fruitful and multiply to everyone else around them. And it's just like, for us, I mean, my wife and I, we give back a lot in charity and everything, but we're also paying X number of dollars in taxes that could go directly to people instead. And so I'm hopeful that we can also think about those types of trade-offs as well, about why is government even getting involved in this when it should be up to the people first. Don't you think something along those lines as well?
I agree. I mean, I think that, it's Hayek's knowledge problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that we don't even well-funded private charities face the knowledge problem.
Yes.
And they don't have a profit and loss mechanism. And so they have to be vigilant about this. They don't want to create dependencies. I mean, if you think about what our goals are here, we should, charities should be putting themselves out of business. And what I mean by that is, as people are elevated out of poverty, we want the charity to not have to do what it does. Now, it might switch and do other things, right?
Yeah.
But that should be the model, and it's not the model. And so I also think there's just a lot of special interest group politicking involved in the way we give humanitarian aid. And that is true in government to government aid, which I would completely abolish. I would never give government to government aid. As you mentioned, it does not go to the people. It distorts incentives. It props up illegitimate and corrupt governments. But I mean, maybe the answer is not having any government involved. I mean, you said, maybe it is, maybe it's not. But I don't always think we're even willing to entertain that as an option. And as economists, we say, we do means, ends, cost benefit analysis. So that should be on the table.
Yeah.
What is that counterfactual? What would it look like if we didn't have a giant federal U.S. welfare system? Well, we actually know, because we haven't always had it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, in the early days of the United States, healthcare was provided for by basically religious organizations that formed hospitals. And so there is a way to think about what this could look like. And I don't think we should take that off the table.
Yeah.
But I think we meaning kind of socially, are afraid of those types of conversations. As you mentioned, I too am very worried about crowding out. I think, again, 150, 200 years ago, if your house burned down, your neighbors would be there to help you in a variety of ways. Until your house was rebuilt, right? Today, if my house burned down, what active role would my church have? I think it would have a role.
Yeah.
But I think it would have a different role than it did before. Maybe some of that's good.
Yeah.
We have different technologies. We have better insurance. We just have houses that don't burn down as much anymore. All those things are really good, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that the government, to the extent that it's involved, crowds out the private sector, the church sector, the true charities. And so I think we need to kind of think about Tocqueville's arguments. And he talked about the robustness of these institutions in American civic life. And so I think we need to kind of reclaim that. And I agree with you that I think it's generally an overwhelming government that crowds out those sectors and makes it more difficult for the church and charities to do what, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
To fulfill their missions.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well put there. And so as we're wrapping up here, What have we missed? What are some of the things that you want?
Everything? Just kidding.
I know, right? I know. we need a whole other 40 minutes, whole other hour going on. But what have we missed, and where's the best place for the audience to find you? And I'll be sure to put stuff in the show notes page as well. But anything else that you'd like to say, I would appreciate it. And I'm just so thankful for all the work that you're doing, and God bless you and your family. But what else would you like to leave us with?
Well, I think that if I could give some parting words, it would be that the fight for freedom is not just a fight for more stuff, right? It's not like a fight so I can have upgrade from my Honda minivan, which is 10 years old, to like a Land Rover. That would be lovely. Yeah. That's not what this is about. It's not just, kind of materialism, which I think gets, the debate gets clouded in that way. I think this is a fight for people's lives. I think this is a fight for longevity. I think this is a fight for agency in your own life and your family's life. And I think that this is a hill we have to be willing to die on. And so I've committed my life. I know you have committed your life to talking about these ideas, and we need to keep doing it. But I think we need to do it in a winsome way. I think we need to find, if Bernie Sanders would have coffee with me, I'm not important and he doesn't know who I am. And if he read my bio, he would say, no, she's probably, a crazy market person. But if he would have coffee with me, I would want to say, here's what I agree with you on. Yeah. Let's talk about the ways to get solutions to those problems. Yeah. And I think we then have to realize that we don't do that in one meeting. We don't do that in one tweet. We don't do that in one social media post. But we have to invest in relationships with people, whether it's our students, whether it's people that listen to your podcast, over the long run, and be really, really intellectually humble about the whole process. So that's what I think I'm working on doing. I don't do it perfectly. We always have to kind of try to get better. So those would maybe be my parting words, but I would, of course, love to come back to talk about more, because there's so much more we could discuss. Yeah, definitely. Well, I love that. And I'm thankful for you to keep doing all these things. But it'd be great to have you back on. And so we'll do that again soon. And just thank you for all the work you're doing, Ann. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks so much, Vance. Thank you, Ann. Well, and for the audience, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Go give us a 5-star rating. Share it with your friends and families. They, too, need to learn more about this and a biblical view of economics and other things that are going on. And don't forget, go check out For the Least of These, A Biblical Answer to Poverty by Ann Bradley and Art Lindsley. And the other books by Ann are great as well. So go be sure to check those out. I'll leave all this in the show notes page. You can find those at vanceginn.com or vanceginn.substack.com. And until next time, let people prosper.